And she rose up after a long struggle in her early life.
This is Fumio Kishida, the Prime Minister of Japan, host of the G7 Summit. That's when Prime Minister Modi had gone over there. Has been Prime Minister of Japan since
His
October 21.
Mr. Fumio Kishida, Prime Minister of Japan.
Was in India in March 2023 for the Japan-India Summit meeting with Prime Minister Modi, one of the biggest backers of India. In fact, the G20 Summit took place in Osaka in 2019, where there was a big discussion around exploitation of the internet for terrorism. Again, the warmth of the relations between India and Japan, you can almost feel it. Prime Minister Modi's body language just conveys how happy he is.
No, this is a country, this is again one of those countries which goes back to Prime Minister Modi when he was Gujarat Chief Minister. This was a period when the Prime Minister, among the countries that reached out to him actively, was Japan. The Prime Minister made it a point when Mr. Abe passed away to be there.
No, but that's been going on since the time he was Chief Minister.
No, that's what I said. 20 years. Since Mr. Modi as Chief Minister, if there's a country that you would say was among the first. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, when he became Prime Minister, Prime Minister Modi in 2014, the two countries he first visited, I think, were Nepal here in the neighborhood and Japan. Japan was the first country outside the neighborhood that the Prime Minister had gone. So with Japan, we've had a very strong relationship, but Prime Minister Modi in particular has had a very strong relationship with the Japanese.
This is the South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, just coming out at this moment. Another great friend of India, Prime Minister Modi, working very hard on that relationship
His Excellency
with
Mr.
South Korea.
Yoon Suk Yeol, President of the Republic of Korea.
Yoon took office in 2022 as the 8th elected president of Korea since Korea became a full democracy in 1987. In 2020, India, South Korea signed the roadmap for defense industries cooperation. The 5th G20 summit was held in 2010 in Seoul in South Korea. And at that time, the focus was the development consensus for shared growth. The president of South Korea, again, South Korea, Japan, very important partners along with Indonesia in taking on the rise of China, in combating the rise of China. Very, very critical role. And they were, for a long time, ambivalent of, hoping for China's rise to be beneficial to them as well. Now they see the threats posed by a resurgent China.
And you saw a bit of a reflection of that when the Prime Minister was in Indonesia just a couple of days ago. The kind of statements that emanated from both sides suggest that India does see a big future in its Look East policy and believes that there will be huge benefits to be had by building in a way these strong relationships with countries like Korea, with countries like Indonesia, with countries like Japan, and using those relationships to try and spread their influence across the world. And I think that is a huge challenge for the Prime Minister to ensure that that Look East policy is further intensified in the years ahead.
Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, coming up now, elected president in 2018, re-elected in 2022, used to be a leading trade unionist, became a symbol of black capitalism in South Africa after the ANC came to power in 1994.
President of the Republic of South Africa.
India has about 1 million people of Indian origin, constituting about 3% of South Africa's population. South Africa is the only country at the moment from Africa which is a member of the G20. And remember, South Africa will host the G20 in 2025.
I met him in the early 90s. He's quite a remarkable figure because these were the people, a constellation of leaders who emerged in and around Nelson Mandela in the 90s. Now, while Mr. Mandela was, the father figure, it was the likes of Cyril Ramaphosa, who was the chief negotiator during the negotiations that ended apartheid. He got his due much later. Many believe he could have well succeeded Nelson Mandela right away. But look, South Africa, again, a country much like Mauritius, with a large Indian, with that substantial section of an Indian origin population, which is which means that your relationships are built on decades of trade, of being part of, let's say, India's sphere of influence. I mean, from Mahatma Gandhi's time down to where we are today, India is one of the countries where, which will always have a special place in South African hearts, and South Africa will always have a special place in Indian hearts. I mean, India played a huge role in ending apartheid by being one of the countries that pushed the world to isolate the whites-only South Africa.
The president of Turkey, freshly re-elected, won a tough, bruising election. Recep Tayyip Erdogan coming in. India and Turkey have had their differences on various issues. But here he is, Ambassador Dogra, the president of Turkey, just coming in. He took office again in June 2023, was Prime Minister in 2003, elected President in 2014. Seen as a
Republic of Turkey,
giant in Turkish politics.
No, but he's a contentious figure. His particularly his sort of familiarity with Vladimir Putin. Also the fact that he is seen by many. I know an economist writer who told me he's the closest leader he's seen to Prime Minister Modi. In many ways, in his style of functioning, in the way he is,
no,
in
but
the
there's
way
a lot
he
of corruption there. In the manner, he's got his whole family in government, his son-in-law. So there are very big differences.
But look at the dominance that he's also now
For 20
exercising.
years, no, he's
very
trying
much
to build
like
a new Turkey.
He's seen as he's seen as a contentious figure. Depends on, his supporters believe that he's building a new Turkey. His critics believe that he's an autocrat who's crushing all opposition, all dissent.
And there was a coup attempt against him in 2016, which he survived.
And he's in a country which is in financial crisis.
Which he just survived.
Oh, there he is, Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, Great Britain, walking down the political G20 red carpet,
Prime Minister
coming in with a blue
Kingdom.
tie, a black suit, coming in to meet Prime Minister Modi. You see him and you get this very warm feeling of someone who's, he's not really one of ours, but you get that feeling when you see him and Akshita walking around New Delhi.
We've discussed. Rahul, what a contrast between him. He's always cheerful. And between him
that's the
and
warmest
Erdogan.
Jappi we've seen. 3 taps on the back. Warm Jappi for Rishi Sunak.
And presumably he is possibly the youngest leader who's there in that room today, because he's 43. I don't know if anyone else is younger, but it's quite remarkable that at 43...
Probably Meloni.
Maybe Meloni, but
look at that. That's the longest conversation anyone's had. He's almost doing like a mini lat on the side there with the Prime Minister Modi. They're still going on. He's wishing him all the best in walking out. Prime Minister Modi particularly happy to see him. Here's the longest serving Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. He's had this post since 2004. In 2020, he was reappointed as Foreign Minister. He's seen as President Putin. He just almost stripped Prime Minister Modi going forward. Russia, for the longest time, being a very close, dear friend of India.
And I think, again, the manner in which the Prime Ministers negotiated that delicate balance between Russia and Ukraine will be seen as a huge achievement, because you've retained India's sort of relationship of friendship with the Russians, but at the same time ensured that you kept a certain distance.
And Prime Minister Modi understands the importance of Russia. I mean, despite the war between Ukraine and Russia and the position that Europe would want India to take, Prime Minister Modi understands that Russia has actually been India's most dependable partner for several decades, and therefore wanting to keep that association going. Far less reliable now as a supplier of defense weapons and systems, not being able to deliver on some of the past commitments. But that being said, Prime Minister Modi sees the importance of the ties between Russia and India and wanting to keep that going regardless of Western pressure, and being able to walk this fine balance as well, despite all the pressure.
Small disappointment that that Vladimir Putin hasn't come, or was that expected?
That was expected.
Since he didn't go. But, given India, what Rahul just said, given India's special relationship...
But there was no way he was coming.
If there was one country that he could have come.
But this has nothing to do with
India. But if
India.
there was one country he could have come to, was India.
No, but he'll have to meet Joe Biden over there. He'll have to meet the others.
I mean, if there was one country where you've got to do it, it's in India. Given the special relationship between
India... But
India...
there's a war going on. I think that's like, setting yourself up for failure, having a very high and unrealistic expectation and then saying, nahi hua. To expect President Putin to come in the middle of these...
I've told India was hopeful that if there was one country that, that Putin would come to, it was here.
Rajdeep, I've handled Russia relations for a long time. And Putin really liked being here in India during annual summits. In fact, he made it a point to stay for 3 days, 1 day in Delhi, 2 days in Bangalore, Bombay or something. But this was not expected at all, especially after the South Africa miss. The second thing is, this is not the only time when Putin has been isolated. You remember the G20 summit in Australia? Obama made sure that he was snubbed by everyone. So he left.
Putin
he left
comes out
after 1 day.
stronger. Remember,
You are
even
absolutely
what we saw with Prigozhin, Prigozhin's gone, Putin's still here. He's now there's a big fight over who gets to run the Wagner group. Will it be one of the mercenaries who are with Prigozhin, or will it be his son? So that fight playing itself out in Russia, but Putin's very much there. So is the Russian state, and that continues, and therefore Prime Minister Modi acknowledging and realizing fully the role of India's relationship with Russia, regardless of any European conception of what it really should be.
You know, that is why they say your sovereign interests are permanent. And Putin is one of the shrewdest leaders going around in the world today. Though coming back to the Australia summit, Prime Minister Abe of Japan, he gave an interview just before his death, where he said the wisest leader I have seen is Putin, who single-handedly confronted all the others, including Obama, and had the better of them. So I think it will be a mistake.
But post-Ukraine, he remains this sort of enigmatic personality. His role will, how will history judge him? The jury is out on that, and the next few years will decide that. I mean, will he be seen as someone who sort of isolated Russia in the world, or will he be seen as someone who's taken Russia back into what he would like to see Russia's due place in the world order? So he would have been interesting to have, purely in terms of body language, just there, the Biden possible interaction with Putin. We won't see any of that, but it would have been interesting.
Interesting but sad in a way, because you don't push any leader into a corner